Obviously, anybody.
I know what you're looking at there.
You haven't checked your email.
That's impressive. Did he do that to everybody?
Yep.
You did.
Wow, I've never received one quite like that.
Yeah.
Jonathan Higby.
Yeah.
All right, wow.
I just got here. That's it. Wait a minute. I didn't say that anymore. At least not with the proper way to say it.
Well, there's.
Yeah.
It's still.
I'm seeing it on. It is very much.
Oh,
But
wow.
It was like really fresh.
That is really fresh.
I was just like.
Try it on this one. They keep changing XLR lately. Speaker.
And just said to give.
Yeah.
Give one of them. Sorry, I'm trying to get under the
You said
gun
it,
here.
you did.
You wouldn't make very good.
How did I didn't get one? I'm gonna take the mayor.
Why?
He won't know.
This has been very.
So this is in this is pasted
Right.
in
The
the.
problem with doing it this way.
It's
It
not.
says from
It always.
from the mayor council.
Yeah.
So it's pasted in the card. There's a card that says from all of you.
I'm gonna tease. Except for Sean, it almost looks like. Except for now, like we all don't have pants on or something. Okay,
I mean, we. I'm watching, they're gonna hit that guy. Yeah. Luckily, it wasn't me, but.
Yeah, recording there. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody. So my name's Mike Wickers, Mayor of Cottonwood Heights. Today is Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. And this is the Cottonwood Heights City Council work session, the last work session of the year, if you can believe that. 1 year through for three of us. The first item on our agenda today is a review of our business meeting agenda. I've asked Councilmember Newell to lead us in the pledge tonight. And then we've got a couple of items that we'll do before citizen comment. The first is the important thing that the audit committee for the city just went through. So we met with our director, Scott Georges, and the audit company, Larson Company, correct? Mm-hmm. And so we will basically be doing the acceptance of our financial statements. Anything you want to add to that, Scott?
No, we have a clean audit. There was nothing that was found that's, out of order. They don't test everything, but in their test, sample sizes, they didn't find anything that we had problems and issues with. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked the auditor how common it was to have issues, and he says it's not uncommon. So the fact that we didn't have any else, level of expertise that we appreciate, Scott. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we will move from there tonight to our city council committee reports that I know that I've gotten great feedback on, and people actually look forward to these. So we'll move to that after the financial report, and then we'll move to a citizen comment period. The legislatively tonight, we have three items to consider as a council. Number one being item 6.1, consideration of ordinance 390, which is amending code section 11.16.010 regarding speed designations on certain roadways. That's the item that we discussed last week that would allow us to lower a speed limit on a specific road for a certain.
Did we get the
Matt,
feedback from?
do you want to discuss anything there?
As far as feedback, I haven't had time to do a lot of research on why it is what it is. The only thing I know is that it's a carryover from the county. It's not unusual to have lower speed limits on arterials and collectors through cities. It's, I know just from personal experience in my own hometown, there are 25s through those. That's just anecdotal though, for sure. I don't want to push that out there as the all-knowing answer, but I think this ordinance just gives us the ability to change it versus changing a designation of a road, because if we start changing road designations, then that gets into funding issues that we need to be cognizant of. By changing the ordinance, I don't believe you're going to exactly change things the way they are. It's just the ability to do that as we discuss some things. So I don't have any studies on it right now. I just didn't have time to get into that.
But we did a review of the state code and looked at that, and there's not any restrictions from the state.
Correct.
There's been other communities even recently that have dropped the speeds down below 35. So there's not a state standard that says that we cannot drop it below the 35.
Correct.
And I think
Well,
that's
I mean, for clear, this is not this is changing the speed limit. That one says for whatever reason, you can't do it below 35, but the same statute applies to raising it or changing it based upon what study or
Engineering
warrant.
studies, the warrants and the studies, for sure. It just gives you the ability,
Gives us
if
the
it
ability
happens
to-
and we want to go out for a study and look at something, we can, and then make that judgment. The one thing, we'll talk about
Well,
that.
I guess it would be similar to what UDOT did a number of years ago, or not UDOT, the legislature did a few years ago when they told UDOT you can adjust speeds on state highways as warranted, and they were expecting some of them would go to 75 and 80, which they did. I don't know if the legislature was expecting the Salt Lake County freeways, but I'll get to change to 70, but you determined that was safe, and they did it, and that's where we are now. So
Right.
Okay, so that's what that is. It was from our discussion last week, carried over.
Okay, appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. So, and then the next item for tonight will be consideration of ordinance 391. Approving the project area plan for the town center at 2300 East Fort Union Community Reinvestment Area. So now I was under the assumption, are we voting on that in the CDRA as well? So we'll vote for it twice.
Yes, we have to vote for it in the CDRA meeting, but where it's in the municipality's boundary,
Okay.
there's a requirement under state code
Okay.
that it has to be voted on by the municipal governing body. as
So,
well.
so we will vote, for that actual amendment ordinance twice.
is that on
It's on the
list.
CDRA agenda as well. Yeah.
is it on for discussion before that?
We'll have a public hearing
Yeah, it is not.
So I don't quite understand the vote tonight. Can you?
That's what I'm after is maybe we should have a discussion on what that actually is.
And we can do that now.
Yeah.
Sure. So the discussion tonight is consideration of the draft area plan. I can pull it up. This was also distributed. This is just the plan that enables the creation of a community reinvestment area. I know this is tied into, and the plan mentions that the city is under contract to purchase the Hillside Plaza. But adoption of the plan does not lock the city into purchasing the plaza. What it does do is allow the city to use redevelopment agency bonding as a potential means to finance a purchase. So even though it's written, as one of the priorities is purchasing that project, the draft area is.
Is this creating the area?
This would create the area. And in
Okay.
2019, there was a resolution to proceed with the creation of the area, the
We've not
agency at
done
the
it.
time. What's that?
We haven't actually done that.
Correct. So this is creating an area via this area plan. You can see it here. It's not a great map, but it's the 68 to 70 areas. Acres in the Fort Union 2300 East area. This will allow the city, and I think the intention would be to come in at a later time and amend in a project area budget after negotiating with the taxing entities. So that tax increment financing could be implemented as a future economic development tool. The timeliness of why it's up for consideration tonight, though, does tie into the pending acquisition of the Hillside Plaza property if the city continues to go down that road and decides to use the RDA bonds to
Could
purchase
you
the property.
also help me to understand at the timing and what authority could change the existing land use and zoning related to not only the larger area, but specifically to the 10 acres of hillside?
Land use and zoning are legislative functions, so they exist as they are today, but per legislative direction, those designations can be amended. That's a council direction.
This isn't-
Yeah, and
This
if I
doesn't
may-
affect land use and zoning at all.
Yeah, this won't affect, this plan right here does not impact that. This is a redevelopment area plan to kind of put forth the vision of what we hope to do to get reinvestment in the whole area, not just on one property.
So,
but the
yeah,
whole
So
area.
if the council majority were to want to see that the mechanism to get the kind of vision that we have requires, for instance, form-based code, then is that something that we can immediately act on? How timing wise, can you give some sense of, this is a little bit extraneous to exactly the
Yeah.
CDRA, but I need to have a better understanding of how, how these things can, manifest that would actually bring about the specific kind of development that,
Yeah.
we can either find out what we agree on or don't agree on, or.
Sure. So there's language in the state code and city code. If the council wants to enact a zone change or a land use change, which is a general plan amendment, there's a legal process for doing that. You provide noticing, you hold planning commission public hearing, you take it to council. If the direction is to create a form-based code, or I should say expedite the creation of a form-based code, there's timing element in preparing that. But again, separate of the CDRA at all, that there's legislative language in the state code where that can be initiated at any time to change a zoning on a property or change a land use designation.
And if I may add on this plan that we're talking about tonight, and this is governed under the redevelopment agency law, which is a separate chapter, and it focuses on tools to be able to get reinvestment into an area. And so cities can adopt a plan and redevelopment agencies can adopt a plan and say, here's what we want to see happen. We want to see reinvestment in this area. That's what you're considering tonight, is the potential for reinvestment. How we go about that is all contingent upon, number one, a budget coming forward later on, so we can utilize potentially tax increment financing as an incentive. And then number two, when we work with private investment groups to invest in this area, we will work with them through a potential of a development agreement to facilitate what exactly we want to see for specific sites, whether it's hillside or other areas. Those come back to you as the CDRA board and also the city council, and you define what you want to see, which could include form-based elements, depending upon the zoning, but we come back when there are investment opportunities, and that's when you'll consider development agreements on that. But this kind of establishes the area that we want to focus on reinvestment in this area, and that we're going to use tools to do that, that will be coming down the road through a budget process with this, but this establishes that area. Like Mike said, the big part of this is to induce reinvestment and to give us opportunities with the CDRA to bond for that reinvestment. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah,
And
thank
you can read through here, there's some lines in here that say, this area has been envisioned as a potential redevelopment opportunity since 2005, the general plan, the town center concept, the Fort Union plan, and the vision laid out there. So it really is kind of a proactive economic development tool to set up a mechanism that does allow the city to have greater say in how this shapes moving into the future.
Does this need to happen prior to, I mean, your table 3 on page 13 looks like there's an assumption of a 60% participation by other entities.
That's all.
That's a big suppose. But
Yeah.
do we need to have this in place before we start those?
So I will point to this note right at the end here. The city has not included a plan budget or tax increment projections from other taxing entities. That would need to come back. So as it is right now, there's no guaranteed participation. From
Well,
any
no,
taxing
no,
entity.
there's not. So I guess what's the point of the table 3 and
I think really the point is the plan was edited with, there was some tables in here before that had some of that information in. Because we haven't engaged in those negotiations, we pulled it out. So we may need to go and clean up the other language referring to that, but that would come back in a comprehensive amendment at a later date.
so there's not any actual budget?
There's no
numbers or
budget
any
as part of this plan right now.
Okay, well, yeah, so.
Yeah.
How do we handle that with this
Creational.
stuff from? So all the stuff from Lewis Young is not necessary, it is to be struck from the.
Now,
Okay.
the plan is necessary. The plan is what you're adopting tonight.
Okay.
But these elements will have to come back for amendments to that plan
Thanks.
to address the specific contribution of the other taxing entities, and that's not what. is
So
being considered tonight.
would it be better to strike those portions or?
Yeah, if there's anything that still refers to taxing entity participation, we can make simple amendments that say that is pending amendment to adopt the budget into this plan.
Okay, well, yeah, that seems to make sense. Maybe we make the motion with the suspending the cost benefit analysis because we don't have that plan.
Yeah, the note at the end is supposed to supersede all that, but if we can clarify that even more plainly.
Well, I hadn't had a chance to go through it in detail. I just saw it. I was like, where did you get all this stuff? That's why I asked those questions.
Great, thank you, Mike. So the last item for tonight is consideration of resolution 2022-64, which is approving a consulting agreement with Bowen Collins and Associates for design services. And this is what we discussed.
What we discussed last week,
Well,
the storm drain line on Fort Union.
Stormwater.
Correct.
So, okay. Any questions, comments from the council on that? Great. And then we will not be approving the consent calendar again for tonight. We'll for the next meeting to do the previous meeting as well. And then
At least that's only next year, not next century.
yeah,
It's true.
Millennium.
it's true. Can start saying next year, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So item 3 is staff report. So the first item under staff reports is a fire special service district creation discussion. Let me give a little bit of background to why we're even going to talk about this here for a few minutes, and I'll turn the time over to Tim. So this is a little bit technical, but under United Fire Authority, there is there are 4 current members of the United Fire Authority. Cottonwood Heights, Holiday, Riverton, and Harriman. Then there's a special service district called the UFSA, the United Fire Service Authority, correct?
Yeah, Unified Fire
Unified.
Service Authority.
Fire
Unified
Service
Fire
Authority, exactly. And there are another, I think, 10 or so cities or townships that belong to the UFSA. So what happens is UFSA, because it's a taxing district, so every year, if there's an increase to the member fee, that UFSA taxing district increases that increase per city accordingly. And I don't know if I explained that very well. If you have questions, does that make sense? So basically, we have the current budget. If there's an increase to it, that UFSA taxing district will increase that rate to correspond to what they need to collect the correct amount of funds every year.
We do a truth and taxation hearing, just like
Exactly,
we would if we were raising taxes or any other entity in the state.
exactly.
So the only thing I don't understand, what exactly is the difference between UFA, which includes 4 cities, and UFSA that includes the 4 cities plus additional townships? Are there, I don't,
It's well, so the cities that belong to UFSA belong to a taxing district that can increase taxes to pay for their fire services. We do not belong to that. So our responsibility for our member fee to belong to United Fire Authority comes from our general fund.
Mhm.
So when there's an increase to that, we also have to just account for it within our general fund dollars.
Mhm.
And which is the reason that I want this discussion to take place. Now, Harriman and Riverton, who also belong to United Fire Authority, have created exactly what we're talking about tonight, which is a special service district for fire. And so they do not have to account for increases to their member fee within their general fund. That their fire district does the exact same thing that UFSA does. It will then increase accordingly to account for the entirety of their member fee. Was that really confusing? It took me a little bit.
Means that we would have to start reporting in our truth and taxation.
Well, yeah, if you go on the assumption that UFA has cost increases each year,
Exactly.
UFSA does those. Harriman and Riverton do the same thing. We'll be having truth and taxation. Because if we created a district, it would be in the city. So everybody in the city, we would have our own separate line item for Cottonwood Heights or whatever it is.
It would be our own fund, which is audited separately from the rest of the city. Truth and taxation is separate from the rest of the city. It's a complete fund
so
separation.
is the purpose of it to help the public to understand better the costs of their fire services? I mean, I just want to
The
understand the
logic is,
purpose of.
that's one, that's a good point. That's one of the logic criteria. The second is that from our static, sometimes, general fund, we would then not have to worry about the increases to our member fee each year coming out of our general fund, which would eventually make us do a truth and taxation and raise our rates to cover, because the cost of UFA is not going down. And the reason for that mostly is personnel, COLAs and merit increases so their projections are $500,000 to $1 million increases that the members have to cover.
Because
Does that
what
make
does it
sense?
currently cost the city from the general fund to cover UFA? Did you say $500,000
No,
a year?
no, it's about 4.3, 4.5, somewhere in that range. That's what we
$4.5
pay
million?
to UFA, yes.
So 4.5 million annually out of the general fund.
Correct.
Well, and it's as a line item. This is what we pay UFA. So I mean, if someone wants to know what we pay for fire, it's right there.
So last year, they came to us with about a 300 and something member increase. So we were gonna have to come up with another $330,000. That ended up dropping. We ended up getting it into the 200s, I believe, the high 200s. But we have to fund that increase within our general fund. So we, without any additional the ability to, to specifically increase for that increase. We just have to cover it out of our general fund. So the question is, and this is 100% up for discussion. The creation of this district would mean that we would then hold a truth and taxation hearing every year for this district to increase our member fee according to what UFA is asking us for. If that makes sense. So it would put less stress on our general fund dollar by having that increase come through an increase to the tax district that we would be creating. So there's advantages and disadvantages.
So that's one advantage.
Yes.
What is another?
Less pressure on the general fund.
Well.
I'm
I'm
just want making
I'm
sure.
just going on the list that you're putting together. So that's one. What is another as perceived advantage?
So transparency.
Mhm.
So it would be very transparent, and that's kind of what Ellen mentioned, exactly what we're paying for fire and what those increases are every year. So rather than listening to our budget meeting and seeing, and trying to see that, it would be very transparent every year what our fire cost is and what any increases to it.
So what is the cost of putting together a district?
So then I'm gonna turn it over to Tim to talk about anything that we didn't cover. So I had Tim research what would be required for us to do this as a city. I thought it was gonna be I thought we might have to go to referendum. We don't, but I'm gonna have him talk about what would be required to create that special service.
Yeah, so to create a district, there's a process that we have to go through defined under state code, and I attached that in your packet, but the governing body has to pass a resolution with the intent to create a district.
That would be us.
Yeah, and then written notice must be provided to all property owners. So we'd send out a notice, and then we have to give consideration of any protests and timelines if there is concerns with people that want us to create that or don't want us to create that. And then you would adopt that through resolution or ordinance creating the special service district. We forward the information to the governor's office for the district, and then they go through their process to but basically to get the paperwork and everything in place for that creation of a district prior to collection of funds. And then we have to go through the process of the collection of funds as well. But that's the process that we go through. So there's a cost in the noticing and the education process, of course. And then ongoing, we would have to have separate audits and separate truth and taxation processes for the ongoing cost of creating or having this fund. If we're going to have any increases or things such as that.
Those probably wouldn't be significant. Would that go with our current audit? Can you do that at the same time you're doing the other? Or does it have to be more independent?
As long as as long as the fiscal year matches the city fiscal year, then we can do it. But if you have a different fiscal year, then you'd have to have a separate audit. So as long as we match the city's fiscal year from July 1 to June 30th, then we could include it as part of the city's regular audit.
Which that can be established as part of the documents with the resolution and that as well.
So Holiday and ourselves are the only ones that don't have this within the UFA or UFSA cities. Holiday is actually going through the same process into looking into whether or not this will be beneficial for them as well.
I'll be on, and maybe I can get time. I mean, honestly, when Riverton and Harriman did it, I was a little surprised. And so I may need to educate myself as to why. I understand flexibility in the general fund. But I also see that as The transparency, I think I don't know that we'd get significantly more, because you're either gonna have what, if it comes out of this fund, or you're gonna have our line on it that says we paid you $4 million and we got fire service. I think there is a risk that, and maybe, I mean, you can call it a good thing or bad thing, where we are gonna be doing a truth in taxation. The perception will be, and it isn't completely inaccurate, that the city's doing a tax increase each year. Usually it'll be strictly for fire, but it is us, it is our city.
I'm just suggesting.
I get you, I understand. So that may make city-based truth in taxations a little more challenging. That's kind of a matter of, of what you want to do. The advantages that at least that I've had in my mind on keeping it the way we have a more variety of options for paying for our fire service or a police department or other things like that, because they are general fund. We get a big boost in sales tax, and then we don't have to worry about, then we can go ahead and increase UFA.
Sales tax is obviously, can go down.
Right,
just as
and
easily as
it has,
go
'cause
up.
I went through the years where we lost $1 million a year in that. So, I mean, maybe I need to call.
That's why it's here. It's not, we're not even in
Yeah,
close
I
to
just-
having any type of decision.
I-
We just want to
Maybe you can
get
find
your
somebody in
feelings
here,
and to
man.
maybe even get you to think about it, but I want to hear everybody's opinion.
I think it takes a SWOT analysis to kind of see where something can happen that
Okay, chief.
some disparate impact that can happen from us making this change, even in transition or optics or whatever, just to be able to see what the challenges are in doing so. And then we can have a little, I would have a little more confidence in seeing that. This is good detail and understanding where we're at, but anytime that we do something like this, there's a cost.
I think it's good, and Harriman and Riverton have done it, so we can
And they've
even rely
had it
on
for a
that
couple of
little
years.
bit. Yeah, they've had it. for a
So
couple of
they've
years.
got some
So we could get
experience.
some good feedback.
Mhm.
Councilmember
Yeah,
Burrell?
I share Councilman Newell's concern of taking on, albeit perhaps incremental costs. I mean, I'm all for transparency, but you'd almost have to put it side by side for me to understand why there's actually more transparency with the tax district than being able, a citizen to be able to review our general fund budget and kind of glean the same information out of both. So maybe I haven't given it enough contemplation, but I am concerned about taking on more hours for our staff to manage it. And then the outward costs of noticing and auditing it annually and the things that are maybe involved. So I feel like I need more education. That's where I'm at.
Do you have any idea on excess time for staff to handle this?
It would, ongoing, if we did that, I think it would just be managing another fund. And then if we had to do truth and taxation every year, there's the cost of notice. These aren't huge dollar amounts.
Mhm.
Cost of noticing, cost of going through the process, educating the public, and that would be probably every year if there's increases. Whereas now we go about every 5 to even before that, a decade before we had truth and taxation processes.
You can kind of manage the tax increases similar to how the city currently does, where you could, like, let's say that you needed, say, $200,000 each year for anticipated increases. You could do it in stages where you did, say, a $700,000 increase in 1 year, anticipating to do a couple years and then wait a couple years and do it again. So there are a couple things you can do to manage, so you don't necessarily have to do it every year, but you could do it every year too. If you wanted to do that, you can also carry a little bit of a fund balance in that fund in order to.
Can you go under?
anticipate things. You can't go under. You have.
Can you transfer money into it if you?
You could transfer money, depending
Borrow
on how
from
you set it
yourself.
up, you could transfer it from the general fund in, depending on how you set that up, so. There's.
Just make one more quick point.
It's a little harder to transfer money out of it, because it's for a specific purpose,
Right.
unless it was general fund money that you were transferring back out of it. Then you might be able to do it, but you can't necessarily take money out of it since it's for the purpose of fire. you can't pull it back into the general fund to use for other things. So that's one thing to keep in mind.
I will note,
Scott, then we'll go to.
yeah, initially, the decision to not be in UFSA, we actually had legislation passed that allow us to exit that because UFSA was created just like right when we were incorporated.
Yeah.
And for the city, the numbers just didn't work. Right now, UFSA's sales or property tax rate is like 1195 and ours is point. It's a good chunk of our total city tax rate. With our demographics, our tax base that it had, we figured we would be paying significantly more than we would be if we were just a paying member. So we opted out of the district, which we got the lotto allowance to do. So we've been saving a significant amount over what we would have been had we been in UFSA.
Correct, and those savings would not go away if we did this.
Right, which is the point. This being a district for just Cottonwood Heights, then they
You're not
fill it
sharing.
out.
Yep.
But we've saved tens of millions of dollars
sure.
for our taxpayers because that's why we're not in UFSA to start.
The other thing with UFSA is it's the majority of the board that approves increases, and if you don't want an increase with UFSA, you may not have a choice if the board approves it. So there's a sense, an independency element related to it as well.
When I spoke to the UFSA, they brought up the opportunity if we wanted to be part of that. And we looked at the numbers they were not favorable. They said, well, let me look into it. They came back to me and apologized, said, you're exactly right. The numbers don't make sense for you. I would like to see these side by side so we can do a analysis of what we could look at the pluses and negatives, the cost, obviously, the ongoing cost. And as well, on another subject, as some of these cities have to form their own departments, is it going to get more and more expensive to be with UFA? And so we've spoken about that, the possibilities down the road, but it's going up. What percent was it this year? We saved 1%, right? Of what they proposed.
It's been a couple of few hundred thousand dollars.
It's a few $100,000 every single year increase.
And that doesn't
To
stop.
our member fee.
Yeah.
So our member fee started around 3 and it's up, or less than that, actually 2 something, and we're up in the 4.3 to 4.5 range now. And that's going to keep happening. So that's the stress why I wanted to bring this, because that's reliant on our general fund to cover that.
To be sustainable, we do have to revisit that and keep looking at things.
Yeah, no, they know 100%.
Yeah, so
Looking at cost benefit to
And
shared
included that
services
is
versus
buildings.
our own. Yeah.
yeah,
The other difference, if you're a member of UFSA, which not going to apply to us, you need a new fire station, they build a new fire station. If you're a member city like we are, or under our own district, and we need a new building,
That's us.
that comes on us.
Instead of all of those cities sharing that for Riverton that needs another. Yeah. No, they don't. That's a hypothetical.
Well,
I was gonna say that the comparison of those municipalities to us, or we're on different tax trajectories also. Their growth is gonna add more taxable income to them to be able to accommodate for that increase in their cost. We don't have that same luxury.
Remember, they've done that though. They've created their own fires.
Well, that's what I mean, they have,
Yeah.
but their tax base is gonna grow.
yeah, Harriman's added a couple,
Yeah.
1,000, 2,000 homes.
They're growing fast, so it's gonna be, when we do the numbers in comparison, you're gonna start to see some of that. And see whether that trajectory is gonna actually show that we could end up in quite a little bit of volume in comparison, if we compare ourselves to those.
Well, that doesn't work for a couple of reasons, because so their general fund is going to continue to grow based on more homes and businesses being created in Harriman, specifically in Riverton. They're not covering their fire with that. They've created their special service district that's always there, that we're talking about possibly they're doing. So the increases that they're going to get by growing, they don't even have to worry about using that for fire.
Yeah, but if they get into a problem, they can actually use that general fund, right? To be able to subsidize, to be able to help them with that fund. if
Yeah,
that
as long
fund
as you
gets
set
too-
that district up.
If it
the right
grows
way,
too
then
much
you
and it
can.
gets to be too expensive, we won't have that luxury because we.
I'm not
you know,
getting
the
the
same
point.
I think-
dollar amount.
Their property tax base is gonna
It's
grow.
gonna
It will
grow.
do for their general fund. It will also do for their fire fund.
So you're saying it
And
should
if-
cover that, right? It
Well,
should cover
that
that.
depends how fast they grow, how fast. they grow.
Exactly.
We
Maybe that's the-
we are not
that
gonna
balance.
experience that type of property tax.
Mm-mm.
What do they call
New growth.
it? New growth.
Yeah.
We won't be
Typically less
experiencing
than
new growth.
$100,000.
We would be a lot more likely to have those annual truth in taxations than a Harriman or a Riverton, because
Exactly.
they may be able to make it up in additional property tax.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Which that's the point of this. So what you just said is the reason we're talking about this. Because we're not going to get, our general fund has less ability to continue to grow to cover increases from USDA than a Harriman or an area that has enough, the opportunity to grow more, if that makes sense.
We ran into the same similar thing with the school districts. Everybody was getting new schools, boom, 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 all the way out. And none of our schools were redone. And when we formed the new district, we were able to kind of take care of ourselves. I know it's apples and oranges, but it is something that we need to compare doing what we're talking about doing, because
Yeah.
it is a lot of money and it's every year.
We got
And
some good
that's a
state board
focus.
representatives.
UFSA is
Yeah,
a much
yeah,
broader
yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
Cottonwood Heights Fire District
Yeah.
would be a much narrower focus.
Yeah.
And the only other, I mean, I know that funding public safety like this is a fairly kind of a newer thing.
Yeah.
Because I know that they've had to go back to the legislature a number of times. There's usually a maximum amount you can tax, a set mill levy. And they've had to raise that a few times because the way district law was set up was a little restrictive. They tend to be fairly high. I don't know where ours would land, but that would go into the amount.
So I think maybe what we'll do is, it's been a good discussion, is maybe bring it up as a topic in our retreat.
Yeah.
To spend some more time on, and that'll give us some time
Quick does it
to
take to set it all up and get it going? It wouldn't be happening next year at the earliest. It would have to probably be the year after.
Probably, I mean, it's a process that you have to go through.
Yeah.
As I've outlined, and so,
In order to collect property taxes, the districts need to be established before January
January.
1st. So you typically, you create it, near the end of December or something like that, and so that it can be in effect.
We know
when the
here.
new
Thanks
tax
for reminding me
measurement date
something I
comes
should have
on.
already known.
okay, we'll put it on that retreat.
thank you, appreciate everybody's opinion on that. They're all very valid. So let's move to the next item, which is 3B, our housing plan, which we discussed a little bit last week. So I'll just have Mike, our Community and Economic Development Director, Mike Johnson, give us a little bit more background of where we are.
Thanks, Mayor. This is pretty quick. It won't take the 20 minutes that it's allocated. I believe the mayor and council all received by email the letter from the state a few weeks ago. It was a letter of non-compliance with the general plan element, the 2019 housing master plan. So we've met with the state representative that signed that letter to understand what deficiencies were in that plan. We've made the corrections, sent them back to that same official for review. She has said that the changes we've made are satisfactory and would be compliant. So now we need to actually go through the formal process of amending the plan again, which requires planning commission and city council approval because it's technically a master plan. So this went to planning commission last week. There were no public comments and it was recommended for approval unanimously. So I'll just go through, this is the same presentation we showed there. They're very technical, I would say minor amendments to the 2019 Affordable Housing Master Plan. And the changes made are all just in direct accordance with that letter we received. The state identified two deficiencies. One was very minor, I feel, and it was a discrepancy in the exact language between current state legislation and the language that's in the general plan. The state code on affordable housing and reporting, they adjust it and tweak it and add to it and modify it, it seems, every year. So, you know, over time, the language is going to change a little bit, and I've got a few examples of what that looks like. And then they had asked for more detail to be included in the actual master plan that include, you know, the steps that have been taken to implement the various strategies that the city has identified. These things are both in the 2022 report that the council approved back in October or September, but they weren't in that original master plan. So basically what we're doing is taking the language from the report and putting that in the master plan, and that should resolve the issue.
By the way, during our League of Cities meeting, or I think it was a League of Cities, or maybe it was COM, where the league, Cameron Deal talked, almost every single city, I think, had this issue. So this isn't something that was unique to us, hey, every city, I don't think almost realized that.
Legislative change this last year.
I don't know if it's legislative change or you know, administrative policy on the state side of how they're reviewing these now. It feels like
You're not,
something like
you're gonna blame the elected officials or the staff.
that.
And they talked about this once again yesterday at the Legislative Policy Committee meeting about this whole issue, and the league staff have really been engaged. Number one, making sure that we understand the issues, and number two, making sure that cities get this done, because this is a big deal. The state legislature on how they evaluate what cities are doing to help facilitate growth.
Yeah, we know reporting requirements already are going to be different this next year, and I would guess, if I had to, that we'll see changes to the legislation again this year being discussed. So, you know, this will be a moving target as we move forward. But the update is required to be made by February 16th. There are minor changes with, you know, kind of big consequences if we don't make the change. So it seems pretty straightforward. This is the process. As I explained, the Planning Commission has held the hearing and made a recommendation to the City Council of approval. I'm not going to read through all this, but this is just an example. The 2019 plan is on the left, the proposed amendments on the right. I'm just going to zoom in and just show one example of kind of the nature of a lot of the changes. We'll say strategy B here, and this is just copying and pasting from the state code what the various options are. So these are not the ones we've chosen. But it says, you know, where in 2019, the state code says facilitate the rehabilitation or expansion of infrastructure, et cetera. Now in 2022, the state code says demonstrate investment in the rehabilitation of expansion of infrastructure. So it gives you a sense of kind of how technical these changes are. The sentence says the same thing, it carries the same intention and the same meaning, but it's worded slightly differently as a result of state code updates. So a lot of the changes are just that.
That's from the big long list of all the things you can do.
The second part of this was actually changing the wording, the same concept, but changing the wording in the strategies that the city had identified in 2019. So we've done that here. And then on the right, so you can see here on the left in 2019, we identified the strategies and then just had a simple paragraph on how we were going to try to implement that. 2022, again, consistent with the report that you looked at recently. We've again identified the strategies, and then we've had to just create some more detail here of, hey, what's the goal we're going to use to implement allowing for accessory dwelling units? What are the outcomes that we anticipate? How are we measuring this? What are we doing? Basically, it's a more detailed explanation of what we're doing to implement this and the progress we're making. So we've gone through and done that for the strategies identified in 2019. And I will again clarify, with the general plan, we're going to take a whole nother look at if these strategies are the ones that we want to stay with, if we want to update them, if we want to approach this differently. So that's coming anyways. This is just updating the plan that was already in place. And then the last thing we're doing is adding just an appendix at the back to have the 2022 data attached to it. Because right now the plan has 2016. This is what was in the report that we've already submitted. It's just not in that master plan, so we're attaching these. So that's really all the changes. I think we've got this on for public comment at the next meeting, but we'll put it on for action as well, given that we feel it's very minor.
I found this really interesting.
Yeah, we discussed this at a council meeting. It was the same data that we discussed a couple months ago.
There's places we're ahead, there's places we're behind.
Yep.
We net out.
Yep.
Okay, but
So because the process is, because we're making an update to our general plan, we will have a public hearing at our next meeting for public comment to this specific,
For this technical amendment.
for this
yeah.
technical amendment. And we doubt that there'll probably be a lot of people.
No one came to planning commission.
Nobody came.
So that's the.
And so if there are not any comments, we'd be prepared to vote for that right after. We have to have this submitted before
Mid-February.
mid-February. Okay.
And I may have to abstain since I sit on that board,
On the board for,
workforce, Department of Workforce Services.
oh, okay. Okay, yeah,
I'm not sure if that'll.
I don't-
May or may not.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's a conflict. You can
I'll
announce
find out.
that you serve on the
Yeah,
board and
yeah.
then.
That's
Makes
what I'll do that. I'll do that at the minute, on the minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, so long as you declare a potential conflict, you
Exactly.
can go ahead and vote
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Sometimes you may,
but that's basically why I was gonna say I might have
if you
to.
just,
something
I won't.
I didn't want, I just had to throw it out there.
well, thank you again, Mike. So don't go too far as in.
So can I just
Go ahead.
ask really quick?
Yeah.
Is this on the website that citizens can look at this, the modifications and?
We can put it on there. There's language, the final formatted document wasn't quite ready. So the language, the proposed language is in the planning commission packet that's published. We can now put the new draft, the finalized fancy looking document on there as well. That's fine.
Yeah.
Great.
And where would they find that?
We'll put it on the adopted and special plans page. We'll put it right where the existing housing plan is on the community development
Oh,
webpage.
great, thank you.
So excuse me, item C is a sensitive lands evaluation and develop standards SLEDS ordinance update. So we'll keep you here, Mike, and have you keep going.
Right, like I stated last week, I don't have any new content. It's just any follow-up discussion, questions by the council. We looked into the fertilizer, if there's an approved list of pesticides or insecticides or fertilizers that can be used near open water sources. The source water protection manager for the state reached out and said they don't have a list like that. So we're still looking into it. It doesn't seem like there's a list anywhere of regulatory agencies that are going to say, yeah, go ahead and use these fertilizers by water. Generally, they tend to think, yeah, we don't want that by our water sources if at all possible, but still looking into that.
I mean, if something like that comes up, it seems like that would be nice to be able
Yeah.
to not have to go change the code to let somebody do it. But
It's
I can
been
understand why They
recommended
don't want.
that we contact a few other people, so we've reached out. Okay.
And what is the longer term plan related to bringing sleds to, it's.
Yeah. We would open this for public comment beginning in January. And then as long as you
And
want
I
to,
beg your pardon, but
Yeah.
it is the entire sleds,
The
not just
full-
riparian. It's the whole thing will be opened up to public
Yes.
comment in early January. So there's no further revisions.
there can be.
There can be, we don't have any.
That's what the public comments about.
And one other question, we want to make sure the council's comfortable with that. We're not trying to push. January is when we necessarily want to do it. We want to make sure the council's comfortable for us to start the process for approval. So if that's part of the reason why we're talking tonight, if there's other questions or issues, we can discuss those, and if you're comfortable, we'd like to start moving whenever you're ready to move this forward through public
Yes.
comment.
The website updated with all the latest changes.
The latest that I've presented, there have been a few, like I mentioned last week, a few procedural clarifications with the DRC process that I'll add in. I wanted to get this initial round of input in, and I'll include those. So by the time this goes to public comment, again, whenever you're ready, we'll have all the changes
Well-
made, and then we can keep discussing it from that.
So when will we as the council be able to see it in its finality?
Well, right now, it's very, very close. The changes I'm talking about are really minor, just wording changes. So what's published on the website and what has been there is the final document as it exists today.
I understand that. So I guess my question is, when will the final document be ready that we can review in its finality before it goes to a public hearing?
With these minor changes, is that what you're,
Yes.
probably with the packet the week before that meeting, but again, what's in there right now is 99.5% what it'll be, even with these minor updates. So what I would suggest is if there are changes or recommendations, start looking at those now, because what changes that we're gonna make are very minor and it's not gonna change much of the substance at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if there's someone that had wanted to start preparing a public comment, they could start with the current document.
Yeah.
We're just looking to say this is good enough that we want to put it out and have people review it and bring forward other, we've had a lot of people do that already, obviously.
Made lots
The
of
people with the
changes.
riparian and the other things they saw and they were like, wait a second. And so we've done a lot of, hopefully we've covered most of it, but we need to give everybody a shot at a good solid draft proposal.
Yep.
That then, and does it have to go back to the planning commission?
No,
So once the public comment period is over, we discuss anything that comes up during that,
Mhm.
then it would just be a matter of us making any final decisions and approving.
correct. Yeah. Yeah, and I was gonna check, the current ordinance that's on the website has been there. I believe since. I don't wanna say the wrong thing. Since September, it's existed as it does today, so it's been out there publicly.
That's
for
just
people to
after
read.
the planning commission did their approval.
The planning commission made a recommendation in August, I believe. And they added some conditions which we changed. We made updates per that, per meeting with some residents, and then it's been the same since then.
Was that, Mike, just to clarify, was that vote with the planning commission, wasn't that like 5-4 or something like that?
Yeah, it was 4-3.
Because I'd like to talk to some of those that had objections, and is there anything highlighted where the changes have been made or
Yeah.
not?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
It's all redlined, so
Okay.
you can see what it was and what.
what it is now.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that all those people that affects directly, especially with Parian.
And
You know.
those people, there's been a large email group. They've been emailed that draft directly, so that's.
Have you had any
been circulated.
feedback since?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Hey, well, thank you again, Mike and council. So item D,
So do we want to have Mike get that ready for public comment in January, or do we still want to hold off? Was that the question, or did I miss it?
I would.
We certainly
the same
can.
plan to get it ready for January.
But like Tim mentioned, if we don't want to push it too fast, if we want to make sure that we have it clarified, because originally there was a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding. And then it came to a revision. And so it would just be nice to have everybody say, now I understand it. It's not what we thought it was originally. And then we're okay. to
Right, and I
go.
think
Yeah.
getting it out to the public
Yeah,
accomplishes that. I don't have
Yeah.
personally a lot of things that I'm interested in still tweaking. Let's get it out there. If something comes up, then yeah, let's discuss it.
as long as the commentary isn't done by somebody that has a certain idea about what it is. I just don't want to get it too convoluted. You know what I mean?
So the one thing you could definitely do is have the public comment in January. That doesn't mean you have to vote the next meeting. You could take that public
Could be
comment
February.
and think it through. If you wanted to have another work session discussion on it with some of the issues, you can do that and schedule it whenever you want. So you're not even starting it in January doesn't push
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
any further
I feel
than
comfortable with
how
that,
comfortable
yeah.
you are in moving it.
Yeah, this is all city initiated, so the regulations proposed don't apply until it's adopted, obviously, but it's at your discretion. Okay,
Beautiful.
perfect.
So our last item under staff reports is a critical risk assessment from our UFA authority. And Assistant Fire Chief Riley Pilgrim is not here yet, so he will be here shortly. So what I'm going to do, we do have an item to discuss in a closed meeting.
Oh,
So to discuss property acquisition.
Property acquisition.
And so what I will do is we'll entertain a motion to move to a closed session. When we come out of that, we'll go to the critical risk
back to-
assessment
right.
and then close the work session. So at that point, I'll entertain a motion to move into a closed session.
I move that we close our work session and move into an a closed session for the purpose of discussing property acquisition.
I'll second.
And all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.